Christina Owens pushed aside my curtain and came in quietly, like she was afraid even the sound of her footsteps might scare me. She sat beside the exam table and spoke in the gentlest voice I had heard from an adult in years. She told me her name again, explained she worked with Child Protective Services, and said I was safe right now. The word safe barely even sounded real to me anymore. My entire body still felt numb from the drugs, but hearing someone say those words out loud almost made me start crying. She asked if I understood where I was, and I gave the smallest nod I could manage. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, like that tiny movement confirmed something important for her. She explained that medical staff needed to know whether my parents had given me those injections willingly or by force. I stared at the ceiling for several seconds because even answering felt dangerous. My entire childhood had trained me to stay quiet. My parents always said outsiders would separate us if we talked. They told us nobody would understand our family and that people would twist everything into abuse because society feared perfection. But as I lay there under the bright clinic lights with the smell of antiseptic in the air and my sisters unconscious behind separate curtains, I realized perfection had almost killed us. I turned my head slowly toward Christina and whispered the first honest sentence I had spoken to another adult in years. I said we did not want the surgeries. Her face changed instantly, not shock exactly, but the expression of someone hearing the confirmation they already feared was true. She asked carefully what surgeries I meant. My throat felt dry and painful from the medication, but once I started talking the words would not stop. I told her everything. I told her about the measurements every morning and the haircuts at the kitchen table. I told her how Violet fainted during gym class because Mom wrapped her chest too tightly. I told her about the wigs, the dyed hair, the punishments whenever one of us looked different. I explained the cameras, the locks on the doors, the homeschooling, and the doctor in Mexico who promised to make us identical forever. Christina listened without interrupting, though several times she pressed her lips together like she was trying not to react too strongly. When I mentioned the surgery plans involving ribs and vocal cords, she quietly stood up and walked out of the curtain area for a moment. I could hear low, urgent voices outside. More footsteps entered the clinic after that. A doctor came in with gray hair and tired eyes, followed by another police officer carrying a small recorder. Nobody looked skeptical anymore, nobody looked confused. Every adult in that clinic finally understood something terrible had happened to us. The next several hours blurred together in pieces because the drugs kept pulling me in and out of sleep. Sometimes I woke to nurses checking my blood pressure. Around noon the medication wore off enough for me to sit upright. My body felt heavy and weak, but my thoughts were finally clearer. Christina brought me juice and crackers and asked if I wanted to see my sisters. I nodded immediately. A nurse walked me down the hall to another room where all three of them were resting together now. Violet looked pale and exhausted. Ruby still seemed half asleep, her tiny body curled under a blanket. Hazel sat upright on the edge of her bed staring blankly at the floor with her long shoulders hunched forward the way Dad always forced her to stand. The second Hazel saw me, she burst into tears. Not quiet crying either. It was years of fear exploding out of her all at once. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly my chest hurt. Then Violet started crying too, and Ruby woke up confused and terrified asking if we had missed the flight. None of us knew how to comfort each other, because we had spent our whole lives pretending emotions made us weak and different. We just clung together shaking while nurses quietly closed the door to give us privacy. That afternoon investigators interviewed each of us separately. For the first time in my life, adults listened to us individually instead of treating us like a single unit. A detective asked me what my favorite food was. I froze because I genuinely did not know how to answer. Mom always ordered identical meals for all four of us. Then he asked what hobbies I liked. Again I went blank. We had never been allowed separate interests long enough to develop preferences. The detective looked heartbroken by how hard basic questions were for me, but slowly little truths started slipping out. Hazel admitted she loved astronomy and secretly read books about planets at night using a flashlight under her blanket. Ruby confessed she still practiced violin silently using her fingers against her leg because she missed music so much. Violet said she hated wearing pink and always wished she could dye her hair black. When they asked me what I wanted, I started crying because nobody had ever asked before. Meanwhile, the investigation around our parents exploded fast. Officers searched the van and found medical syringes, sedatives without prescriptions, stacks of surgical paperwork, and before photos the Mexican doctor had taken of us. The police also found folders filled with notes tracking our measurements for years, weight charts, facial symmetry calculations, voice recordings. My parents had documented every difference between us like scientists studying defects in a laboratory. The surgeon in Mexico vanished as soon as authorities contacted the clinic. Investigators later discovered he had already been under investigation for illegal cosmetic procedures on minors. The hospital where Violet had been treated reopened their abuse report immediately, and suddenly dozens of adults started connecting pieces they previously missed. Teachers remembered how nervous we always looked. Doctors recalled Mom refusing private examinations. Neighbors mentioned hearing screaming late at night. One former hairstylist even reported chemical burns on our scalps years earlier. But Mom had switched salons before questions could be asked. Our parents were arrested 48 hours later. I did not witness it directly, but Officer Hayes later explained they were taken into custody after trying to destroy evidence at the house. Apparently, Dad smashed hard drives containing years of recordings from the cameras inside our bedrooms while Mom attempted to burn medical files in the backyard grill. Neighbors called 911 when they saw smoke and heard yelling. By the time police arrived, both of them were hysterical. Even then, they still insisted they had done nothing wrong. They claimed they were creating unity within the family. They described it as an artistic lifestyle and accused the government of attacking unconventional parenting. Mom reportedly cried during questioning and said society obsessed over individuality too much. Dad argued identical siblings would have stronger emotional bonds and fewer insecurities. Neither of them seemed capable of understanding the damage they caused. My sisters and I entered emergency foster care together at first because none of us could handle separation yet. The state placed us with an older woman named Denise who had spent decades fostering abused children. She never raised her voice once. The first morning at her house, she asked us what cereal we liked, and all four of us panicked because we did not know we were allowed different answers. Denise noticed immediately. Instead of pushing, she bought 6 different cereal boxes and told us we could try all of them until we figured it out. That tiny moment broke something open inside me. For weeks we struggled with basic independence. We asked permission for everything, we apologized constantly. Ruby had panic attacks anytime someone complimented her individually because she thought it meant the rest of us would be punished. Hazel physically could not stand up straight anymore without pain. Violet refused mirrors completely. As for me, I kept waking up every night convinced cameras were hidden in the vents. Therapy became our entire lives. At first I hated it. Sitting in a room discussing feelings felt impossible when I barely understood who I even was. But our therapist, Dr. Bennett, was patient. She explained that severe control can erase a person slowly over time. She told us children naturally develop identities through choices, friendships, mistakes, and preferences. We had been denied all of that. We were not born incomplete. We had been intentionally stripped down until individuality itself felt dangerous. The hardest part was realizing how much of ourselves we had buried to survive. One afternoon, Dr. Bennett asked each of us to choose clothes separately for the first time. That sounds ridiculous now, but it caused a full meltdown. Ruby cried because she liked a yellow sweater while the rest of us picked darker colors. Hazel refused to choose anything at all because she worried the wrong outfit would upset someone. I stood frozen in front of a rack of jeans for 20 minutes, overwhelmed by too many options. Violet finally grabbed a black hoodie and muttered she was tired of pink forever. It took months before simple decisions stopped feeling terrifying. As the criminal case against our parents moved forward, more horrifying details surfaced. Investigators found journals Mom kept documenting every time one of us showed signs of individuality. She called them deviations. Some entries described punishments for smiling differently in family photos. Others tracked puberty changes with obsessive anger. One entry about Hazel growing taller actually said corrective posture discipline required immediately before asymmetry becomes permanent. Reading those words in court made me physically sick. The trial lasted almost a year. Prosecutors charged our parents with child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, medical neglect, illegal sedation of minors, and conspiracy related to the surgeries. The defense tried arguing they suffered from a shared psychological disorder involving obsession with symmetry and identity control. Experts testified about extreme parental enmeshment and pathological perfectionism, but none of that erased what they did to us. I testified on the 4th day of trial. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping back into a nightmare. Mom sat at the defense table wearing a gray suit, her hair perfectly neat as always. Dad looked older somehow, thinner and angrier. The moment Mom saw me, she started crying softly like she expected sympathy. For one terrible second, I almost felt guilty. Then I remembered the syringe entering my neck in the airport parking lot, and the guilt vanished. The prosecutor asked me to describe our childhood. At first my voice shook badly. Then I looked over and saw my sisters sitting together in the gallery behind the prosecutor. Hazel sat perfectly upright now after months of physical therapy. Ruby wore bright yellow headphones around her neck because she loved music again. Violet had dyed a streak of purple into her dark hair and looked almost defiant sitting there. Seeing them reminded me why I needed to speak, so I told the truth. I described the measurements, the bindings, the forced surgeries, and the locks on the doors. I explained how terrified we were of becoming ourselves because our parents treated individuality like betrayal. The courtroom stayed completely silent while I talked. Several jurors cried openly during the part about pretending not to bleed through my jeans at school because getting a period early was forbidden. Then the prosecutor showed photos from the airport. The pictures of us unconscious on luggage carts looked unreal even to me. For teenage girls in matching hoodies lying limp beneath fluorescent lights while strangers walked past pretending nothing was wrong. One juror covered her mouth with both hands after seeing the injection marks on our necks. My mother's attorney cross-examined me afterward and tried suggesting I exaggerated events due to teenage rebellion. He asked whether our parents ever physically beat us. I answered no. Then he asked whether we always had food, shelter, and education. Again I answered yes. He smiled slightly like he thought that helped his case. Then he asked why I never simply told another adult earlier if things were truly so terrible. I looked directly at him and said because when abuse is your normal, you do not realize surviving should feel different. The courtroom went silent again after that. The jury convicted both of my parents on nearly every major charge. Mom screamed when the verdict was read. Not crying this time, actual screaming. She pointed at us and shouted that we ruined everything. She yelled that we were ungrateful and weak and infected by selfishness. Dad just stared straight ahead with a blank expression while deputies moved toward them. Neither of us visited after sentencing. The years after the trial were messy and painful in ways movies never show. Freedom did not magically fix us. Sometimes it actually made things harder because suddenly we had to become people without knowing how. Hazel needed surgery on her spine from years of forced slouching. Violet struggled with depression for a long time and carried deep scars from the chest binding. Ruby developed chronic ankle problems from those stupid lifts Dad forced into her shoes. And me, I struggled with mirrors. For years I could not look at my own reflection without instinctively comparing myself to my sisters. I would catch myself searching for differences like differences were dangerous. Sometimes I still panic when someone says we look alike even though siblings naturally resemble each other. Trauma does not disappear neatly. It lingers in strange corners of your life. But healing happened too, slowly, quietly, in pieces. Hazel eventually studied astrophysics in college because she never stopped loving the stars. Ruby became a violin instructor for children and filled her apartment with music. Violet got tattoos and piercings and changes her hair color every few months simply because she can. Watching her reclaim ownership over her own body feels beautiful every single time. As for me, I became a counselor working with abused teenagers. I think part of me wanted to become the adult I needed back then. The kind who notices when something feels wrong instead of looking away. I keep Officer Hayes' photo in my desk drawer because if he had ignored that tiny squeeze of my hand at the airport, none of us would have survived those surgeries as ourselves. People sometimes ask whether I hate my parents. The truth is more complicated than hate. I think they loved us in the most broken and terrifying way possible. Somewhere inside their minds, they truly believed sameness meant safety and control meant love. But love that destroys who you are is not love, it is possession. And children are not sculptures parents get to carve into matching shapes. The strangest part is that my sisters and I still resemble each other. We always will, same eyes, similar smiles, shared genetics. But now the differences stand out too. And those differences are my favorite things in the world. Hazel laughs too loudly when she gets excited about science. Ruby hums unconsciously while cooking dinner. Violet rolls her eyes whenever anyone tells her what to do. And me, I finally learned how to answer when someone asks who I am. That answer took almost my entire life to find.